Thank you all for coming. For those who are still joining us, we're going to give it a couple minutes. See one brave camera. Hi, Joe. Good to see you again. Definitely a few more people logging on. I think my Zoom start time has been 3 minutes after the hour. There's somebody who's not muted. All right, well, we will go ahead and get started. It's great to see names on the screen. I'm glad you're all here. I hope after we run through the presentation, you'll throw your cameras on and share your questions and concerns along the way. We're here to help guide you through this very exciting week. I know it may seem nerve-wracking, but it's still exciting. Each year, we lead the interview orientation, so to speak, or the introduction to preparing for your interviews a little bit earlier, but I purposely postponed it because obviously interviews have not been shared with you or invites haven't gone out yet. That would be unreasonable because of the delay in the overall cycle. So I know that this is a bit premature, and I'm hosting this before you've even finished completing your certification of your ERAS applications. But I didn't want to wait too long to start talking about the whole idea of preparing you for your virtual interview. So that is what we're going to review today. And with that, I will get started. So thanks for being here. We're recording, and I will share the recording as well as a few documents that are really important that I know we've sent around earlier, but I will follow up after today's session. So I wanted to start out by letting you know that we're going to divide this brief part of the presentation into two sections. Mostly the first part talking about the interview itself, not necessarily the details of the format of the virtual interview. The second part, I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about our own conversations that we've been having to help prepare you for that virtual experience. But I also know that I've been sharing links to some really great resources that are circulating nationally. And I don't necessarily want to take the time away from your questions and answers, where I know that others have done a really fabulous job with some of the same tips related to the virtual interviewing. So first we'll focus on things that really have not changed in this presentation, specifically what the whole concept of the interview means and how to prepare to really show yourself off to the best of your ability. So first and foremost, when you receive an interview invite, and yes, all of you will receive interview invites sooner than you know, you have to remember that they really do want to meet you. Students often feel that maybe this interview is just a courtesy interview. And you'll hear all of us tell you that no interview is a courtesy interview. If you receive a precious invitation, particularly to programs you're really excited about, this is your chance to show yourself off. So today, as we talk about preparing for that experience, I know it's easy to ask you to keep calm because this is a very anxiety-ridden time in general, and add that we are going through this together with a lot of uncertainty, so it is hard to stay calm, but the more you prepare, the more ready you will be, and that's why you're here today. We talk a lot about the uncertainty of the cycle, of the process, of what to anticipate, and it becomes very difficult to advise our students with any kind of certainty or expertise when we're going through all of this together. So that's not to let you know that your advising deans are not aware of what some of the challenges are, but this is to remind you all that we have had to accept a certain degree of uncertainty in the advising world. We do not have the perfect ability to communicate with every program director at every program in every specialty. And so we've relied on, just the same way you're relying on information from peers and from residents and from program directors, we too rely on a lot of information that we have been receiving from the medical education community and from program directors and from the advising groups that we belong to help guide us through this process together. So if at times you feel more confused and unsure than you would like, understand that you are not alone. That doesn't necessarily make you feel better or more confident going into the process, but understand that we have confidence that you all have what it takes to shine in these interviews. And as long as we follow the process that we're all anticipating will work out in the end, that you're all going to be very, very successful. So why do you interview? It may seem obvious that folks want to meet you, whether it's virtual or in person. The opportunity to interview is just as much for you as it is for the program. Although it will be different, not visiting the programs in person, the opportunity to interview really helps you prove that you are someone that the program wants to work with, that you're competent to hold the position, and it also is a way for you to prove to the program that there are advantages to hiring you. Remember that this is a job opportunity and you're interviewing for a job. And lastly, the more interviews you receive, the more opportunities you will ultimately have to rank programs, because you obviously cannot rank programs at which you did not receive an interview offer. So that becomes part of your strategy. I'm going to delve into some specifics here, mainly about how to manage the interview offers, as I know that they will come. But I want to take a moment and first remind you all that as we talk about the nitty-gritty and we talk about the details, I think most importantly, I really want you to believe in yourselves and believe in your ability to trust the process. We talk about this from the time that we started bringing up the transition to residency, which may seem like a lifetime ago. But recognize that we know that our students are coming into this process still coming in with a great reputation from the Miller School of Medicine, the excellence that you all have achieved in your clinical education particularly, and knowing that program directors know, even without you having rotated there, that you are coming in and will be very successful residents, ready to hit the ground running on day one. We talk about this a lot, and our students and our graduates come back and tell us that they understand what we were talking about once they start residency. So we want you to feel like you're going into this send off of your application for those that are applying through the regular match. I know some of you have already applied early, and recognize that you have every reason to go into this process with a degree of confidence that is earned. And if you feel less confident than that for a variety of reasons, certainly work with your advising dean along the early stages so that we can keep you motivated and keep you excited about what we know will come your way. Any questions before I delve into some details? Feel free to unmute or throw them in the chat. All right, I'll continue. So I frame this talk each year really about the most common questions that we receive from our students. The first is, what happens when I start getting interview invites? And we know this year that many specialties, not all, I wish all, but many, have started to indicate that their interview invitations will come out on a specific date, at least the first round of offers, that they're trying to make clear that the interview release date is at a set time for all programs, so you're not wondering that whether you need to check websites and figure out whether the school that you're really most interested in or the program you're most interested in has or has not released their interview invitations. Many programs do not adhere to this, but more and more seem to be interested in trying to do this in a collective manner, which helps you plan. But let's say you're participating in a specialty where there is not one set release date. You may find that you're getting interview offers from programs that were certainly not at the top of your list, and you certainly don't want to give up any interviews at the very beginning. So you've also heard, I'm sure, throughout maybe the past year, that one of the hardest things that happens when you are receiving your interview invite is whether or not the program is even giving you time to respond in a reasonable manner. One of the biggest complaints that applicants have shared over now the past 2 or 3 years is that some programs over-invite, meaning like an airline, they try to overbook their interviews. They will, for example, have 50 interview slots and invite 75 people. And students will say that they responded in less than 5 minutes, only to be found that they were put on a wait list. So this programmatic need to overextend interviews has been met with a lot of resistance on the student affairs side. And thankfully, more programs than not, I believe, are recognizing that this really is not a professional or an ethical way to offer the interviews. And many are adhering to only offering the number of interviews that they actually have to share. If people cancel, then they will continue to interview. So yes, the urge is to respond as quickly as possible. We understand that. Some programs, hopefully, and some specialties that have tried to socialize this need to give you a chance to make a reasonable decision about when to schedule will indicate in the offer that you have maybe 48 hours to reply. But many do not. And so an immediate response sometimes, unfortunately, is still the norm for some programs. And you'll know that when you receive your invitation. So if you need to respond quickly and you need to pick a time and a date for that interview, recognize that this is not a perfect science and your calendar will change repeatedly. If you respond early, or you have to respond early, a lot of times a rule of thumb is that if it's a program that you're less interested in, you may choose to schedule it later in terms of the dates that are offered to you. Because no matter what happens with the virtual interview offers this year, even though it may feel like you're going to want to do more than you might if you were traveling around the country, we know that there's still going to be a limit to
the juices anymore,
successfully,
right?
And that you will likely get tired. So if it's a program that maybe is near the bottom and you need to schedule it quickly, you may want to choose to schedule it a little bit later. That may give you more options. Another rule of thumb is you probably don't want your top choice interview to be your very first interview for obvious reasons. You'd like to practice. The next bullet's important. You can change and reschedule your dates. We want you to cancel and reschedule politely and with notice, and ideally no later than 2 weeks out, if at all reasonably possible. There are programs that will keep track of how many times you do cancel and switch, and some students have been concerned about that. So if there are extenuating circumstances that really make you switch more than 2 times, make sure you're thinking carefully about the need to schedule and reschedule that interview. The other thing is that the interviews that come your way, the offers will come from different sources. They don't always come directly from the program. You may get an email. You may get a notification through the ERAS calendar. Not all programs use the ERAS calendar to do their interview inviting. And many programs use third parties, Thalamus, I think, being the most common one. So you will get third-party invites who manage all the interviewing, including the scheduling, the cancellation, and the rescheduling. So each of your schedules differ, and we want you to do what's best for you. But in terms of timing, the other thing that may be a little bit off this year is that we're not sure exactly when every specialty will be offering you that interview, and it probably will vary. Was there a question? I'm sorry. I won't see the chat as easily, so if you have a question, definitely unmute and interrupt me, please. In terms of timing, this is labeled exactly how we hear it. As the interview offers are coming, it is common that many students start to feel nervous because they feel that they haven't received many yet, and they're not sure if more are going to come. So this is where the uncertainty becomes significant for all of us who are advising you this year. Traditionally, programs will send out their first round of interview offers. And it is pretty common that there are some applicants around the country who will receive many offers in that first round, and other applicants who might receive some, but will be holding on to wanting to hear from the programs that they're really, really most interested in. And I put in italics here that we hope that this year, not unlike any other season, that applicants will at some point start to decline and cancel interviews. And this is honestly a big challenge this year. There is a real fear that students will hold on to many more interviews than they need meaning that perfect number to complete, to feel comfortable, to rank and match. And we feel that it will be more common because students will not need to travel, that they may hold on to more interviews and not cancel them. So the nationwide sentiment is that we as your advisors really need to work carefully with our students and make sure that even if someone is offered 25 interviews, that they recognize that they will still be tired completing that many and should focus on the ones that they are most interested in. And we hope that nationwide students will still adhere to the sentiment that they don't have to over-interview, even though things are virtual. Provided that things move along the cycle as we anticipate, those who may not have heard as much early on will hopefully get additional waves of interviews that come out. We also hope that this year, given that more specialties are trying to look at interview invites in waves of actual dates, that there will be less uncertainty, that you'll actually know that my specialty has sent out their interviews maybe in round 1 and in round 2. And we as your advisors are here to help support you through this process. We want you to be able to keep in touch with us and let us know how things are going on the interview front. And we will be querying you about this repeatedly. Sometimes there is a need early on to identify whether you need to expand your applications to programs. Hopefully that's not the case because that doesn't necessarily garner more interviews. And in red is the most important part, especially in this virtual environment, that in a select manner, not usually reaching out to every program, but at that right time, identifying when is it time to actually reach out and try to communicate with programs to express my interest and why, and see whether or not my reaching out or my networking will garner an interview that maybe I didn't receive before. Lastly, if it becomes a significant concern, some of you have had conversations early on about activating a parallel plan. Questions? I see for ERAS, is it recommended to use our MED email address or a Gmail account? I think that's really a personal preference. It's not a recommendation in ERAS. Some students like to set up a separate account purposely to be able to track their emails more readily. There is no specific answer to that. And some students do this based on preference where they're going to have more access to their email. Are you hearing otherwise of why there's a reason to have a Gmail account other than not mixing up your emails and being able to keep track?
I think I had heard that since the school might filter, it might take a little bit longer, so you can't as quickly respond to interview and invitations.
Gotcha. Thank you for the clarification, Natalie.
But yeah, I didn't know if it looked like
I have never heard, I haven't ever heard that that's true. Sorry. I haven't heard that that is true. Obviously, you're going through our network. And if you don't have your email set to junk or to spam, and you want to make sure that you turn off all of those settings, then you may prefer to get things through your MedMiami EDU account.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Machover.
Sure. Okay, we'll continue. If you're going to reach out to a program, again, students often say, what do I say? Should I call? Is it worth it? And every year we talk about this during the interviewing chat. And every year we hear back from our students saying, I didn't think that that would really work. I didn't think that calling a program would really ever amount to anything. Now, this does not mean that reaching out to every program will garner you an interview at every program. But getting on the phone and demonstrating your interest, especially at a time where it's very difficult to demonstrate your actual interest, you could be pleasantly surprised that if they are still going through the interview cycle and offers are still potentially available, that's what you can inquire about. Your questions are really about the status of interview offers or the status of your application. If they're full, you can describe your interest to the program. If you do this by email, you could be specific with a couple key things, your location, your ties to the area, something specific about the program. You can ask to be placed on a wait list, which this year I hope will still be very, very important. And you can ask when additional interviews will be released. We want you to stay optimistic because every year, some of these inquiries really do amount to additional interview offers. So we're not suggesting this as a strategy for no reason. And again, your advising deans will continue to work through this with you and identify programs that maybe are the ones that you should reach out to. Before I switch gears to talk about virtual interviews, the other thing I wanted to mention to you all, and I don't have a slide for this because you have a beautiful view of the ERAS user guide, but you receive from ERAS every time they send out a national email to all applicants, some very important information on your application about how you can designate that we can track your interviews. So we, meaning your advising deans and your registrar, Marta, who has access to ERAS. Understand that anything that you indicate in ERAS about access for the dean's designated office or the dean's workstation to see anything in your application does not mean that we or Marta or anybody in our school who has access to that workstation would ever be able to share that with other programs. And this is very important because this year, this ability to designate that your dean's designated officer or office can view your interview progress is new. And it is specifically a feature that was put into place to make it easier for you to track exactly which programs you've applied to and which ones you've received interviews from. And it also allows us to track that without having to send you additional surveys asking you to tell us how many interviews you've received and from which programs. So this is an incredible new feature, but the only way we can see where you've been invited to interview is if you, in your application, where it asks you by the interview calendar to designate your dean's office to be able to view this, you actually have to opt into that feature. And I'll send you something by email that shows you exactly what I'm talking about. So that's for tracking, because we will keep track of this and we will stay in touch with you regularly. There is a question about the specific time when it's appropriate to contact programs. I assume they don't want to be annoyed by too many messages sent too early. That is correct. So the appropriate time depends on the specialty, depends if the first wave went out. I'll use OBGYN as an example. Because OB was a leader last year in really setting the stage for interviews all to go out at the same time and on a specified date, it probably would not be appropriate to email immediately after that first wave because they also had a second release date. So for those of you that are struggling with number of interview and you're not sure when the right time to reach out, some of that will be specialty dependent. And again, something we'll keep track of with you about when it's appropriate to reach out. Not a perfect answer for any program. I mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to shift gears now to talk specifically about the virtual interview. Obviously, that is new for us this year. And like I said, I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about all the nuances to prepare you for the virtual interview because I think the resources that are being shared nationally are fantastic. And if you have not seen them yet, again, I have links in this presentation. I will send out by email and by Teams again, so you can watch if you have not yet done so, because I'm sure you're focusing first on getting that ERAS application out. So when we talk about the virtual interview, you're probably going to experience a combination of live interviewing and maybe asynchronous interviewing. And it's hard to know exactly what every program is planning because each is doing this in their own way. So there may be a combination of some preset technology where questions are presented and you're asked to respond to them and someone will review those. That is less common probably this year as just using Zoom for a face-to-face interview. That's what we anticipate. Let's talk for a moment about what will make a suitable environment. I know that we asked your class leaders to help us with a quick poll, and thanks to those of you who responded. If you have not yet responded and the poll is still open, please do, because not only to us, but across the country, one of the biggest and urgent needs for those of us in student affairs is to really identify how to manage some of the uncertainty around who will need some assistance with a suitable environment and for how long. And I'm going to talk about the space in a moment. A suitable environment should obviously be private and quiet and free of potential distractions to the best of your ability, well lit, with a lamp, a window, or light in certain directions that probably are not my best lighting right now, actually. A neat backdrop does not need to be a fancy backdrop. A clear space, ideally a clear wall free of distractions would be best. As you're hearing from many of the virtual engagements that have been circulating by specialty or just in general about preparing for the virtual interview environment, that sometimes the virtual backgrounds can look a little off, like your arm disappears like mine or your hand disappears. So actually not using anything virtual may be just as useful as long as it's neat and free of distractions. And an outlet, because you're not sure how long you will be online, or an extension cord if you need one. I want to talk to the class about space expectations, and so you understand some of the limitations and understand why we're doing the best we can to be creative, but we want you to be creative as well and to be reasonable. The last bullet about us continuing to communicate about specific room reservations or space reservations, that's in the works. It's been in the works for a while, and we are continuing to identify the maximum amount of spaces that we could have for reservation purposes for you all to use once the interviews begin, which may be relatively soon. The challenge we have amidst COVID is we need to make sure that the spaces are those that we, meaning in medical education or at UM at Miller, control. We have to make sure that they are clean, or that you're able to clean them in between. We'd like them to be reservable. And because staff in many places are working remotely, we don't want to have spaces that you don't have access to, so that you run into a challenge on any given day where you might show up thinking you're going to a certain conference room that might be available and then you can't get in. And that's really not acceptable. So all the work that we're doing on the back end is to make sure that it's not just identifying the space, but that it's also a space that is usable and available to you at any given time. The other challenge we're facing is I've shared with you the Google survey data that our colleagues in the Northeast put together, trying to survey program directors and asking, how long are the interviews going to be? And if you've read any of this, we anticipate that most of the day will be similar to the actual live experience. So you won't be limited probably to just the half hour or the hour for the interview. You will probably be asked to be online for quite a bit of time, which is a good thing, to engage virtually with residents or with faculty or with presentations or videos that you're asked to watch on camera. So if a student is reserving a space, we also recognize that it would be very disruptive to you to be in one location and have to be in that location only for the hour that you have your interview, very likely unable to plan that way. So the challenge we're facing is most of you may need interview space for potentially 4 to 5 hours at a time, and it wouldn't be conducive to schedule 5 students back to back at the same time during that hour. So I just want you to understand what's going on behind the scenes as we're trying to plan for this. And this is why we ask your peers to reach out and help us understand who really feels that they absolutely have no space that is conducive for a virtual interview in their living space or in another living space that's comfortable, and that you need assistance in defining that. And what you'll hear from me shortly by email is to help us identify, have those students identify themselves to me so we can work through how we're going to do our best to prioritize this. The other thing is that we're also still working with your peers to identify some creative solutions for just a backdrop. If you really have a space that works well, but doesn't meet your needs for being free of distractions, ways that we can do that potentially inexpensively. Questions about this? I'll wait for you to contemplate that for a moment. There was another question about the timing. I see, Tasneem, that you asked, how do we know when these waves start and end? So the waves of the interviews, some of them are advertised through any of the handles, if you're following still on Twitter or on Instagram, or through the specialty specific response to COVID site that I've circulated. And again, I'll send all these links again. Specialties are notifying in their circles about these dates if they have set dates. Many do not have set dates. So the waves often happen all at once. And quite honestly, we don't have a magic way of cataloging all the programs. But as much as we don't love to send students to Reddit or to SDN, I would say that Reddit tends to have pages that students really populate to the degree of names of programs and specialty at which people are receiving invites. And every year by specialty, that's crowdsourced by students usually, and often a place where students go to at least see what people are saying about what interviews seem to be out. And we review this with you as well. Thank you, Sam, for posting it. The survey, if you have not filled out the survey about interview space and virtual interviews, please fill it out. It should take you just a couple minutes. Your peers left it very short. Okay, space is very important and one of the most important things I wanted to talk about. The next thing, expect the unexpected. We know, and program directors know, that things are going to happen. I've been in the middle of presentations and my internet goes out, and it's embarrassing and it's frustrating, but I think it would be foolish in this day and age for any program director or interviewer not to be compassionate to understand that these things happen. The challenge is that in the middle of an interruption, you don't want to lose precious time. So we understand that it's disruptive, but you do need to be prepared that these things may happen. And some of the ways to overcome that is to be prepared ahead of time. Make sure that you have all the contact information, that you're not just going by a link on your computer. If your computer decides to die down in the middle or you lose your charge, have things written down, have contact information for either the interviewer, if you know, or the program coordinator. This would be the same that we would give you advice if you were going to an interview live, to make sure that you had the phone number on your phone or written down also in case you lose your phone or your phone dies, to be able to call somebody. So these are important things to remember before each interview, and do everything you can to stay charged, have an outlet, bring chargers, and certainly avoid some of the distractions that can interrupt you as well. What might happen on your interview day? I say might because we anticipate that many programs will likely try to mimic what a typical interview day would look like. There will likely be some pre-interview session, some kind of social gathering that, especially because you're not traveling, will be much easier to attend. This is the opportunity to really get to know residents, to engage with the people that may be your colleagues for anywhere from 3 to 7 years. On the interview day, usually you'll hear, whether it's recorded or live, from the program director or the department chair. I'm not entirely sure how programs will engage in rounds and conferences. They may have these going on by Zoom and have you link in by Zoom as well. There's usually other welcome speeches. The tour, we hope programs who aren't investing a lot of their resources in feeding you for the day or necessarily putting you up in hotels, most are investing those resources in technology. So your tour may be recorded and maybe have some components that are live as well. And then the interview itself, obviously, is a critical component of the day. In terms of thinking about best practices for the day, again, this is coming from feedback that the GME environment, all the graduate medical education folks, have used from fellowship interviews, which were happening virtually early on. And really the buckets are to optimize the physical environment to the best of your ability, to optimize technology, and then to practice. And I will share with you that while there are some resources out there that people can purchase, or schools have thought about purchasing to put you through virtual interviewing, we have a resource that we have invested in for our students for over 20 years, and that is the mock interview program. And I know that Kim Green has already completed over 75 interviews with you all. And the feedback that I've been receiving so far, like every year, is that it is a fabulous opportunity to be put in a situation where you have to answer questions. And thankfully, Kim was willing to make everything virtual this year, so you could practice everything about that experience with her one-on-one. That is invaluable. I know that it seems like it's full right now. If your advising dean has suggested that you really must interview and you don't have a slot, please email our office, me and Ashley, and/or your advising dean, to make sure that we identify a time for you to be able to practice. The practice is critically important, not just to get comfortable with your technology, but to be able to watch yourself and get feedback on how you're interacting with the screen. The nice thing about Zoom itself, even if you're not working with any kind of program or having questions come your way, is you can record yourself and just put questions next to you and answer them and watch yourself on your own in your Zoom environment. Feedback from that national survey about how these interviews were going to work, thankfully, did suggest that most folks are using Zoom as the technology, but there will likely be some that you're not as familiar with. So give yourself time to practice. This hasn't changed. So the benefit is, if you're going to be on screen, obviously the top of what is visible needs to be conservative. Not a time to necessarily get too creative with living in Miami, and recognizing that you still want to appear professional and dress in a way that you would have dressed if you were going to a live interview. And by all means, if you have questions, you can certainly ask us. Body language becomes really, really important. It's difficult sometimes to maintain your enthusiasm on a screen. So if you know that that's difficult for you, I would highly recommend that you practice by recording yourself and seeing what you appear to have in terms of your level of enthusiasm on screen. The other thing that's important is, we don't know throughout the day, if you're on a Zoom session, let's say for 3 or 4 hours, and joining in conversations and breakout rooms, I would absolutely leave your cameras on within reason. Of course, if you need to take a break for a moment to grab a drink or something, that's fine. But recognize that you're going to want to appear as engaged on screen as you would have in person. Certainly being honest, learning to maintain eye contact, which is even harder on a camera. And as you can see, you can't practice your handshake necessarily through the screen, but I would replace that with making sure that you smile. Oh, we're not handshaking. Sorry, we would have practiced that live. I added this because every year we talk about the pre-interview dinner. And I really don't know if some programs will be creative and invite you to dinner the night before. We will see. And I'm curious to hear back from you what kinds of pre-interview events are happening, whether there will be some some food purchased or not, whether they send you food. I don't know whether they'll do anything like that. I haven't heard specifically from programs. I don't know if any of you have heard that that may happen. If that's the case, that would be pretty cool, but I don't know if that's going to be collectively planned. If that were the case, the thing here that still is important is to try to attend if you can, making mental notes of what it's like to interact with the people that are there. I added limit alcohol. I say that every year, and certainly if you're online the evening before, you still should limit your alcohol. And if you are going through this process with a partner, each year, students often ask, can my partner come with me if they're coming to the city with me to see the program? And I think similarly, the interaction allows you to have a partner obviously off screen if you want them to engage and just see what you're seeing. But if it's important to you, it's the kind of thing that you can certainly ask the coordinator, because if it's important to you to see how your partner engages with the group, or if they indicate that partners are welcome to join the session, then I would certainly invite that person along with you, because that interaction can be often very important for you if this is a joint decision. Things not to do during the interview. I know these seem obvious. Do not chew gum, even if you need to chew gum to focus. Bite your nails. I don't believe anyone would think to smoke on camera. Drinking coffee. So that is more when you're in person, but similarly, don't drink too much coffee that you need to have the effects of coffee lead you to leaving the camera frequently. The cell phone, you do not want to be distracted. That's the same with notifications on your screen. And if you are a fidgeter or you click a pen or you make noises and you're not on mute, be sure that you check those as well. During the interview itself, now I know that Ms. Green, for those of you going through the mock interview, are delving into this a whole lot more. So some high level things, and again, I have this in print and we'll share this with you. And this is in all of the resources that I've been sharing about just preparing for interviews in general. You must know everything that's in your application and your CV, including your research. Remember, it's fair game to be asked about anything that you have included. If there are weaknesses in your application or things that you know you've had to overcome, you should be prepared to talk about these challenges in a meaningful way and not dwell on them, but show how you've overcome the challenges and how you've grown from those. If you are a talker, listening more than you talk is going to be really important. And on a screen, if you're not getting the same kind of social cues about when someone else might be about to speak or there's a delay, that might be a little bit different. So you're certainly going to want to be aware of giving your answers succinctly or talk comfortably, but make sure you're making time to pause so you can listen as well. However you're going to greet somebody, even though you're not shaking hands, practice that greeting so you appear confident. And how you answer sometimes is critically more important than what you actually say. The confidence is going to be important to exude through the screen, and that will take some practice. Obviously, we want you to practice. I've mentioned the mock interview and ways that you can practice on your own. I have some slides here for some potential questions. These come really from things we've put together from Isarson's Preparing for Residency, online resources, Careers in Medicine, some specialty specific links that have some great questions that different specialties are known to ask. Again, I will share this with all of you so you don't have to read through them now. But some of the most common questions being common, just like you prepared for your interviews for medical school, you should practice and you should know what these questions may be so you're able to address them accurately. Questions that are sometimes more difficult, questions about partners. There are certainly in the HR world illegal questions that you should not be asked, but you can read articles about this. And unfortunately, the reality is that there are folks that for whatever reason still find it useful, probing, provoking, for whatever reason, asking questions that really are not acceptable. And those are often about partners, asking about life plans, marital plans, and I hope that this year, more than ever, students report back that these are few and far between. But in the event they come up, you have to be comfortable with how you choose to answer that question in a way that is meaningful for you. And we can talk about this more if you have specific concerns. The other thing that you need to be prepared for is that you need to ask questions. It goes without saying, just like when you go to any interview, to do your homework ahead of time and make sure that you are prepared to ask some questions, even if you feel like some of them are the same questions that you might ask on other interviews. Most importantly, you will likely be asked what questions you have about our program. And so not being prepared really makes it look like you're unprepared or haven't done your homework to be engaged in this being a two-way process. It also gives you a chance with asking these questions for your interviewer to do a lot of talking. And a lot of times the interviewer wants to be the one to share information and feel like they're recruiting you as well. So you certainly don't want to do all the talking. Ask interesting questions if you can and have them prepared ahead of time. Red flags. So I went through these and most of these still to me are very relevant, even though this is a virtual environment. As you know, in the live circumstance, you would have had the opportunity to meet with residents face to face. And if you're going to lunches and nobody shows up, or you're at the event the night before and they couldn't get residents to come, especially the residents that they recruit to these events, that's often a red flag. So even virtually, if there are opportunities for you to meet with residents and you're finding that at a particular program, there just doesn't seem to be a lot of engagement with the residents, that could be concerning. Excuses are on here. I would say this year there certainly will be a lot of apologies, and I think that's totally fine. But excuses about things that are questionable about the program. If a program is on probation, the NRMP, the National Residency Matching Program, has ways that you can check this. Failure to show endpoints. If you really want to know where are all of your graduates, many programs are very eager to share that information with you, and it's usually on the website. And if not, and you can't seem to get that information, that may be concerning. Work hours. This is something not to talk to your interviewer about, but certainly a common question that students like to ask residents and get feedback. And if a family-friendly environment is important to you, by all means, those are questions to also talk to residents about. And you may see, again, in the evening event or a weekend event or something that you're invited to. Another common follow-up question. So you interview and then it's time to say thank you. So there is a lot of debate here in terms of how to do this correctly. And I would say that there is no perfect answer to how to thank a program other than following their lead. More and more, this falls into the area of what we call post-interview communication. The post-interview communication is meant to be neutral. Obviously, it is polite to say thank you, but many programs are trying to follow the lead to limit any post-interview communication so it doesn't negatively influence or inappropriately bias the applicant or put undue pressure on the program. What that means is some programs may flat out tell you, do not send us any post-interview communication. Do not send us thank you notes. Do not communicate with us, asking us questions or telling us how much you love our program. We will not use that any way, shape, or form to rank you, and we do not want to hear from you. Some are very rigid about that. And if they tell you that they do not want any post-interview communication, you should listen to them. For the most part, programs will not deny receiving a thank you note. I think some programs ignore them entirely. Some may expect them, so not sending one may make you look like you lack some graciousness. And some may actually pay attention to them. And unfortunately, I can't tell you which programs, other than telling you for sure that those that indicate that you should not send any, you can listen to their advice. Some students very much still like the old-fashioned handwritten notes, and you may think that that's crazy. What do programs do with them? Usually they scan it and add it to your folder. I think that nowadays most students will still email their thank yous, and they often ask who they send it to. In some cases, you may be interviewed by multiple people, and if you had, let's say, an interview, 2 interviews, one with each person or a panel, it may be difficult to identify who you should be sending that thank you to for all of those panelists. So it is okay to send it definitely to the program director, key faculty, a special resident who went out of their way to help you for the day or through the interview process, or definitely the person. If you had one interview with one faculty member, that's who you want to thank. Note below, be sincere, be brief, thank them for the visit, and note something personal about what you enjoyed about the visit. And you should not be mentioning anything about the ranking of the program. They don't want to hear from you about the ranking of the program early in the interview process, and often your decisions are going to change. So you're simply talking about the opportunity to meet and learn about the program. And later we will have a whole conversation in January about the rank list. Questions? I've been talking a lot. I feel like I'm recording myself and talking to the screen. Any questions from all of you? Okay.
Hi,
Yep,
sorry,
please.
I had one
Yeah.
quick question.
Yes.
On one of the earlier slides, you had mentioned like activating a parallel pathway, and I wasn't really sure what that meant. So I don't know if you could elaborate on what that meant.
Sure. A parallel plan is also called Plan B. Sometimes we've had conversations with applicants who we worry may not be as successful in the process. And so many students have a parallel plan in place, meaning an alternative specialty option. They might be double applying. They might have a Plan B, which looks like focusing on prelim applications, So activating the parallel plan may be something that your advising dean has talked to you about, and you might have in place from the get-go to avoid having to activate it later where it's more difficult to navigate the terrain. So that's what it's referring to, an alternative to the regular plan of the chosen specialty. Does that
Thank
answer
you.
your question?
Yes, yes. Thank you very much.
Sure. So a couple other things. What happens with a second look day? I don't know if any of you have even heard of second look yet, but it comes up when we talk about interviewing, because historically, traditionally, you would go on interviews and then you'd limit things down to your top choices. And sometimes programs may invite you for a second look. So it's very encouraging when you're invited to come back. It certainly wreaks a lot of havoc later in a traditional interview season, mainly because it's very costly and students frequently are frustrated, wondering whether it'll look bad if they don't come back to a program for a second look. So during COVID, I think this is going to be very different. I hope that if there's any intention of a program to invite you to come back, that is still virtual. That is our hope nationwide. There is also a lot of pressure being placed on programs to really tell program directors that they should not be encouraging students who decide to come to the city to at least look on their own to be able to engage face to face, because it really is going to cause a high degree of unfairness for students who may not be able to afford to travel, or students who for health reasons do not want to travel, or if COVID numbers change, we are unable to travel. So this year, I would say that any idea of visiting an institution for a second look is still highly discouraged for the reasons I mentioned. However, we recognize that some students might say at some point, I cannot commit to a 5 to 7 year residency without going to see a program or see a city. So that is going to be something new this year, and how that's managed will likely be similar to other application processes that are going on in this country, where people essentially go on their own and just visit to see a city if it's safe to do so, and kind of check things out. But there probably will not be any formal in-person second look opportunities. And this is something that I think we're going to have to talk about later, especially as we get closer to rank list timing, because I just don't know how this will play out. Happy to answer questions. Shifting gears for a couple more just high-level details that you need to remember if you haven't already done so. So your application through ERAS, or for those of you that applied military ophthalmology through a different service, the match is not managed through ERAS. The match is managed through the National Residency Matching Program. Because this year, NRMP registration opens on September 15th, which used to be the day that you applied for applications for residency, you can apply and have your NRMP number. Do not worry if you already certified your ERAS application. The NRMP number is not required to be in place, and it also can be added. So if this evening you go and you register for the match, which at some point soon I encourage you to do, the deadline for when the fee goes up, I believe, is late November. So between now and late November, you absolutely should be registering for the match. That NRMP ID, there's a space for it in your ERAS application, and you can go in and add it, even if you've already certified your application. It's part of the personal information that can be modified. The other thing to remind you about the NRMP, if you want to explore any programs that you start getting interviews at and you're interested in whether they've had any match violations, that would be on the NRMP site. There is a help desk at the NRMP site. There is a lot here that describes, I know you've been here looking at charting outcomes, but the match algorithm and how it works. This is where you would go to read about it. Information for couples and how you put lists together. This is all the later phase of the application process. But I do want to alert you to this app called Prism. This is free, and this is sponsored by the NRMP. And what Prism allows you to do as you start interviewing is, like a static form, rate the programs. And I encourage you this year more than ever, because if what we think is true, that students will potentially be doing more interviews than they have in the past because programs may be offering more interviews. As you go through the interviews, don't leave till the last minute trying to identify what factors are important to you and how you rate them with notes. So Careers in Medicine has this as a form. You can make your own, and the Prism app allows you to do the same in an app format, which can help you also track your interviews. Other things to remind you of, if you have not yet been on our new website, this is part of the delay in getting more info your way. There's been a big transition since April of, as you can see, it still says placeholder. So our old website has now converted over to the new platform across all of the Miller campus. And our website for professional development and career guidance has the same information that we've been directing you to for some time. But if you don't know it's there, the match results from 2007, Camila was actually adding 2020. So you could see where our residents are, where they've matched. You can sort it by specialty, you can sort it by program, and you can certainly try to reach out to residents who are at programs that you're going to interview at. It's really, really helpful for you to be able to connect with our former students who can share what their experience has been like in other places, specifically compared to the experience that you know and that they know. Other resources, like I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, Careers in Medicine has a ton of information about virtual interviewing, a webinar, printed pages and checklists. BU has a great video. It's about 20 minutes. And it is also including things about your background and how to set up a space in your own house that may feel better than maybe you're thinking about right now. I showed you the residency evaluation guide. This is just one example of some questions from ACP for internal medicine specific questions. And again, I'll share all these links with you because I think they're very, very helpful as you're going into this next phase. We have a document from a previous version of preparing for interviews that also has the printed frequently asked questions and things, do's and don'ts of the interview. That's on our website as well. Those are all the details. And I'm looking at the chat. Sorry, I couldn't look at both. Let's go back to the chat. I talked about red flags for programs and noticed on Residency Explorer that a program showed continued accreditation with warning. Where can we make more specific about it and why? So the accreditation of a program is going to be under, if I'm not mistaken, the ACGME, the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education. So you can likely go to ACGME, and I personally do not know, I'd have to check and get back to you, whether or not, not ACME, it's like, sorry, ACGME. Oh, I'm doing autocorrect. Sorry, I'm trying to put this in the chat. There we go, ACGME. I don't know if, like the LCME, they publicize this or not. This might be something that you would have to ask the program directly, and they will know that this is public knowledge, and so they will address it. Not addressing it to your liking would be a red flag. Another question was about just applying and certifying your application if letters are not in. So I think I have tried my best to answer this in the FAQ document that I've circulated with all of you, and also in my last 2 emails. You should absolutely submit your applications no later than the 21st. That's Wednesday. Ideally, if you're ready, submit it tomorrow. Don't wait for all the internet traffic on Wednesday. There's no reason to wait till the last second. If your letters of recommendation are not all in, those can be assigned after you certify your application. And if you're nervous about that, read the ERAS user guide, specifically the letter of recommendation portal. It is known that sometimes a last letter will straggle in and it will come a little bit later. If it's a letter that is critical to your application and you would rather wait to submit on Wednesday with the letter in place, that's fine. It is not too late to submit on the 21st, but understand that programs will download that application at 9 a.m. on the 21st. So if I were in your shoes, I would submit the application and then just assign the letters. Those will all be downloaded. The programs will not download your letters with your application because they need to read them. I hope that answered one of the questions that was in the chat. How do you know that everything went through properly? Do you mean for your application? You should get confirmation. You should be able to see everything in your user station, and it will show, like it'll show MSP uploaded, transcripts uploaded, your letters uploaded, and you can see when the Dean's Workstation and the program station are receiving your applications. Should we be applying to more programs than usual this year? Unfortunately, I would say that the national guidance from all of the programs is to encourage applicants to actually apply to less programs this year than in the past. And I know that that may seem counterintuitive because they anticipate that they want, ideally in their world, the PD world, to know that you are really applying to the programs that you're really, really interested in. The challenge is, just like with every year, in an ideal world, that would be amazing. But this is the year that we don't know how interviews will play out. And as I mentioned earlier, our concern on the advising side is that programs may offer the same number of interviews, and students who receive many of them may choose to do more of them. What we hope will happen is that more programs will actually, because the travel is not an issue and they can do more interviews on more days, to combat this challenge, more programs are indicating that they will likely interview more applicants than they have in the past. So back to your question, Elisa, whether you should apply more than before, I think that the decisions that you made with your advising deans or your specialty advisors don't necessarily mean that you have to apply to more. We are having some faith in the process that the same way program directors would be interested in the same number of applicants will hold true this year. And like I said at the very beginning, we know that our applicants tend to do quite well overall across all specialties because programs value the kind of training that you're coming from. So I know that's not a concrete answer. I think that the number that you should apply to should be the same that you've applied to in prior years. There's no data suggesting that applying to more will serve you better. Some students are nervous and they will over apply. And ultimately, in the end, they realize I didn't really need to do that. I got the number of interviews that I wanted. And over applying broadly doesn't necessarily garner a total number that would have been higher if you applied more thoughtfully. But that's very difficult to prove. Other questions? Haven't heard from any of you. The chat's here. There's another question about experiences. Do we write reflections on what we learned from them? Not necessarily for every single one. In your experiences section, that's up to you. Your description often comes from your CV, describing what you did. And if there is something that you want to highlight that you took away from that experience, if it's brief and concise, that's certainly stylistic. There's no right or wrong how to describe your experiences. You want your reader to understand, what is this and why are you telling me about it? I would say the same as you did for medical school. You're welcome. You've been a very attentive audience. I'll summarize. You're all going to do great. This will work out. We're here to help guide you through this very uncertain time. I wish we had less uncertainty so we could share that with you, but know that we are doing everything possible to share the information that we are gathering. As interviews begin and as you're starting to get offers, please remember in ERAS, and again, I'll send this to you with a reminder that the ability to authorize the DDO, the Dean's Designated Office, to be able to view your interview offers so you can go in and mark them will be extremely helpful to you and to us. And if you get interviews from third parties like Thalamus that I mentioned, you can go into ERAS and add that to the calendar. It doesn't automatically update because something coming from a third party doesn't integrate with ERAS, but it allows you finally to track it all in one place. Remember that practice makes almost perfect or perfect. Record yourselves, practice with Ms. Green, talk to your advising deans, and have confidence going into this process because we know you're going to do great and we'll be here to support you along the way. So thanks for your attention. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Dr. Machaber,
Hi.
quick question for you. I can send you an email, but because I was on a research year, I'm still not on the open listserv. Do you have any idea who I would reach out to? Because I get most of the emails, but ones that come from the students, I generally don't seem to be getting.
The open listserv. Okay, you getting
The
my
open
email?
Yeah,
hope
I
you're
get all
getting
of
mine.
yours.
Okay,
But
I care more about mine.
Oh, of course. That's why I haven't really noticed, but someone
That's
mentioned
okay.
something, so I realized that I'm not on that one.
You know, I think it would be Nick Pekarsky. Have you asked
Okay.
him?
I asked a while ago when I was finishing my research year, and I guess they added me to one of them, but not the open one as well.
Okay, ask him about that
Okay.
one because I don't know, or he'll direct you, and you might need
Okay.
to ask a couple times, but that's who I would ask. Oh,
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Hold on, let me stop the recording.
Uh-oh.
Oops.